This is episode 15 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. If you're joining me on Spotify or any of the audio platforms, don't forget to click like and subscribe if you haven't already. Or if you're joining me on my YouTube channel, which I continue to try to improve and make more fun for all of you, don't forget to click the like button and smash that subscriber bell. So you'll notice another little piece I've added, at least temporarily, is this old artifact, SCF & Co., Certified Public Accountants and Business Consultants. And again, it's not an accident that I put this here for at least today. That was my dad's firm. He was the C in SCF, Shulman, Cohen, and First. And the fact that he had offices in the city, well, it kind of plays a role in today's story. So we're going to take it all the way back to December of 1994, so almost 29 years ago. I had elective surgery on December 9th, 1994. It was my first semester as a student at New York University, the Cinema Studies program, not surprisingly. And the reason why I had surgery, when I was in my very early teens, I had hormone imbalance, and that caused me to grow an excess of breast tissue. And for a kid who was already very shaky, was very nervous, had difficulty making eye contact anyway, it reduced the chances of me forming meaningful friendships and, heaven forbid, perhaps even getting close with a young lady, reduced it to what I like to refer to as not just 0, but 0 degrees Kelvin, or absolute 0. Now that's not really true, but I believed it was true, and for the time it was important enough. So in an earlier episode, you might recall that I talked about my fitness journey. And it's probably not so good that I'm admitting that a key component of my fitness journey was the fact that I had cosmetic surgery, but it's the truth. I'm not going to run from it. I was always shy. This situation, this malady, if you will, affliction, what is called gynecomastia, if you want the medical term, it made things that much more difficult. And I started pondering the idea of surgery from as far back as my senior year in high school, when I lost all the weight. And for the first time in my life, not that this is any big deal, he's 18 and he has abs, but I had abs. And if I'm being honest about that too, I liked the way they looked and I wanted to maintain them. I wanted to continue to, build muscle as I could. But the fact that my pecs looked so bad, so flabby, it kind of took away from what I was trying to do. So I began doing little bits of research here or there, and then there was a magazine article discussing the surgical solution for gyno. And I just didn't have the courage, I guess, to contact a doctor and say, hey, what's the cost? What are we talking about as far as the actual surgery? What are we talking about as far as the recovery? And even back then, at age, 20, going on 21, how long am I going to be out of the gym for? All of these things preoccupied me. Ironically, the money was not even, okay, well, I have money from my bar mitzvah or whatever was going on there. So I wasn't worried about how is this going to get paid for, but what are the parameters here? What are we talking about? What's the recovery? What are the risks? Is this a risky surgery? All of that. So as I began my first semester at New York University in the early part of September of 1994, I visited the doctor who would perform the surgery. And I really liked him. As I say, I had seen him in the magazines, and we kind of clicked. He told me exactly what he was going to do and what the recovery was going to be. You're going to feel very stiff afterwards. You're going to be sore. he showed me before and after pictures, and really put me at ease. So we made a surgery date, and he said, you do a down payment now, just write a check. You don't have to give it to me today. There's, again, no Zelle, no Venmo, no nothing like that. Everything was cash or credit. And he even talked about the fact that he made it seem like he was ahead of his time. He says, I do take credit cards. It's fine because I get paid immediately. He kind of implied, I don't give a shit if you don't pay your bill because I'm getting paid. So, and there were some insurances which actually covered this procedure because there was the slightest chance that a guy could develop cancer from it. Like, really, really infinitesimal. But there were a couple of carriers, at least at the time, that covered this surgery. United Healthcare, which was mine, did not. So I was a little bit nervous about the surgery, but not that much, because in my mind it was something that had to get done. I had an image in my head of what I wanted my torso to look like, not just the abs, not just the serratus or whatever, but I wanted to have rounded pecs that did not look like, what's wrong with this? What the hell is that? That doesn't look good at all. Jesus, that's gross. Whatever. So you can call it immaturity, but I really don't care at this point. I know what I felt then, and even now, how I feel about it. So I went in for the surgery, and there are some doctors who do this under local anesthetic, but he said that it's just not a good idea. It's like you might be moving around on the table. So we went with a general, and the general anesthetic was pretty heavy. They used, I want to say they used Seconal and Pentothal, or just not Seconal. It was Pentothal. It was a Pentothal drip. Now that I'm mentioning it, Seconal is a sleeping pill. I guess you could use that, right, for something else. And I had no memory of the surgery, so I don't have any horror stories as far as I woke up in the middle and I was screaming. No, I went out very, very peacefully, and I woke up not in any pain, and the doctor was there, and his wife was there, and he said, this was very simple. It didn't take anywhere near as long as I expected. The tissue just came out right away. I've already patched you up, and the only thing I'll tell you is, I'll remind you again, you're going to feel a lot of stiffness. You're not going to be able to move your arms around very much. Don't even try to lift your arms. Just accept that for a while you're going to basically be very limited with your mobility on both sides. You'll be able to move your hands, but it'll kind of be like almost very robotic. So he noticed that there was normal bruising in the area where he did the surgery, and the incision point, I should tell you, is just under the nipple. In an area where you're not going to see any real visible scarring. You have to know what you're looking for and looking at to see a scar. This particular physician had kind of pioneered different techniques for getting tissue out without cutting across the chest. And for those fitness people and people into bodybuilding, a lot of the top guys have gyno and have had maybe more than one surgery. And not every doctor does it the same way. And some guys have had their careers altered in a negative way because of the way that they took the tissue out and where they cut. But that's beside the point. I went home, and the doctor, they put me in like a pressure vest. He said, not to get gross, but you can't shower this weekend. You can't shower until you come in on Monday, and I look at you and give the all clear. But he said, and this is standard stuff, I can give you phone numbers of former patients if you're curious or if you'd like to talk. And I have my answer service. I'm available to you 24/7. These are the days where people had pagers. So he had a pager, and he had an answer service where you called it, and then somebody told him, hey, Doc, Jeremy's on the phone, or whatever it might be. So I went home, and as soon as I got back home, my right pec, the nipple, began throbbing. And it was a pain that I had never felt before. And I don't mean in that area, because obviously I had never gotten cut in that area, but it was an intensity of pain that I had not experienced. I've been fortunate. I hadn't had any broken bones. The worst injury I had was a bone bruise to my left elbow, which was, in a couple of days, I was fine. So I was in an amazing amount of pain. And I told my dad, And he's like, well, you should call the doctor. No, I don't want to bother him. I don't want to bother him. This is probably what it's supposed to happen. So the whole weekend, I barely slept. And they did give me, not Oxycontins, but hydrocodones, which are obviously in the same ballpark. And I took them, and they really did not do anything to reduce the level of pain that I was feeling. I didn't call a doctor. I should have. I didn't. That was my mistake. I should have called immediately as soon as I got home, and I sensed that, well, why is one side hurting like fuck and the other side just is normal stiffness and almost feels like soreness from a chest workout? That's not correct, but didn't call. So I went through the whole weekend, and I barely slept. I slept a grand total of maybe 3 hours from Friday to Monday morning, and the minutes were ticking by very, very slowly because I was in so much pain and discomfort. Just did not call him. As my mom would say, estupido. She didn't say that about this. So I went to see the doctor on Monday, and I was actually, even though I was in pain, I felt a sense of calm because I knew that he was going to know what had happened and that there would be some form of a solution. So now we're at December 12th of 1994, a Monday, a school day, a work day for my dear old dad. Now, Dad never drove into Manhattan during the week. Saturdays, yes. He would take the car and then, go visit his lady friend, whatever it might be. But he never drove during the week. He always took the train. But on this day, because he needed to take me to see the doctor in the morning, he then, almost like kicking and screaming because he just hated the concept, again, it was my dad for you, we went to the office, which was in Smithtown, and the doctor looked at me. He couldn't believe what the right pec looked like. I'm not exaggerating when I say it looked like a nuclear experiment gone awry. It did. And he gave me the sort of brief diagnosis. That's a pretty significant hematoma. I'm not exactly sure what caused it, but I'm going to drain your pec, and I think you're going to be okay. So it's kind of almost horrifying to think of even this part, but he had some sort of a contraption. It was like a suction that he put at the incision point, and he drained a good amount of blood. I don't know if it was a pint or a half a pint. Now, I should point out that my energy was okay. I did not feel enervated from not sleeping or from blood loss. I felt fine. If you're asking me, how's your energy? How do you feel? I mean, I'm worried, but I feel okay. The assumption was that Dad was going to drop me at home, and he'd probably then get on the train and go to work. But I made a very serious mistake. But maybe it wasn't a mistake when you hear the rest of this. I asked the doctor, am I clear to attend classes today? We were coming to the end of the semester. I didn't have to worry about any tests. I was writing papers, but I wanted to know, am I well enough to go to classes today? And he said, I don't see a problem. I think we got it. I think you're good. If you feel up to it, if you're not feeling well, then don't go. Don't force yourself. But if you're telling me you're feeling okay, by all means, attend classes. So Dad dropped me off at 721 Broadway, the Tisch School of the Arts, New York University, then as now. And I went in, and I got there well before my 120 film class, silent screen. I believe the movie that we were screening was King Vidor's The Crowd. Didn't end up seeing the movie. As I sat in class, and fortunately the lights were out, it was like a big screening room that they had there on the 6th floor. That was the cinema studies floor. I was not feeling well. I wasn't really in pain, but almost a premonition, something was wrong. I didn't know exactly what. I knew it was related to the pec, obviously, but I couldn't piece together why I was feeling this way. And here I was, 20 years old. I had never had this combination of dread and feelings that something terrible was happening, that it was in process. But my energy was still good. I didn't have a temperature. I was sweating a little, but I had gotten up to walk outside. I didn't feel comfortable sitting in the screening room in the theater that they had there for the students. And I had my coat on. I was wearing a very heavy winter coat and a heavy shirt, so I would have been sweating anyway. So I kept telling myself, you're okay, just relax. And I wasn't hyperventilating, but I was trying to almost will myself into not having this awful feeling of dread. So I went back into the class. Again, the lights are still out. It was not unusual for students to get up and move around and walk outside, go to the bathroom, if you had to use the payphone, whatever. This is not high school. We weren't, oh, can I have permission to go? You just got up and go and went. Sat back down, and all of a sudden it felt like an enormous amount of perspiration dripping down from my back and my underarm area. And I still had the coat on, and I reached my left hand into my coat, and my hand was soaked immediately. And I kind of probably did one of those because I was in shock. When I looked at my hand, it was covered in blood. No exaggeration. It was covered in blood. And I realized that my shirt was soaked through the pressure vest, soaked with blood. I don't know how I didn't panic, but I didn't panic. My energy was still okay. Didn't say a word to anybody in the classroom. I very quietly got up, didn't say anything, didn't excuse myself, just grabbed my bag, went outside, went to the elevator. Oddly enough, there was nobody, at least I don't remember seeing anybody on the floor. Went to the elevator and went downstairs to the first floor. And there was like a security cage. You know, even back then, they didn't just want anybody wandering around. You had to have a reason to be there. So I still had the coat on, and I had the coat closed, so I really didn't feel like looking like a gunshot victim, quite frankly. So I walked over to the guy in the security cage, and he goes, "What's up?" I said, "I think I need you to call an ambulance." He goes, What happened? Who? For who?" I said, "For me." And I opened my coat, and if I tell you the look on that man's face, he aged 5 years in a half a second when he saw something out of a horror movie. That this side of my shirt was soaked, and I was dripping, literally dripping onto the floor, the blood. So they didn't actually get an ambulance. They got me over to the triage, which basically was a waste of 10 minutes. Like, what were they going to do for me at a triage? Give me a Band-Aid? Then they got me over to St. Vincent's. And every cliche of a hospital emergency room in Manhattan in that era, I lived it for the 3 hours that I was at St. Vincent's. I lay there on a gurney, and gunshot victims were brought in, drug addicts were brought in, people who had been victims of violence and abuse, stab wounds. I was just hanging out with all of them. And the pain level at that point, it had gone to an epic status. To quote Candyman from the original Candyman, the pain was exquisite. I don't know any other word to describe it. It was a level that I did not think that the human body was capable of, because I hadn't experienced it. It felt like somebody was taking the sharpest knife you could imagine and just going like this on that area, nonstop. There was no break from it. It hurt like hell every second that I was sitting there laying on the gurney. So my dad was notified. This is pre-cell phone era for most people, pre-texting. He had to be called, and thank goodness he was at the offices of SCF. They were able to tell him what had happened. Your son had an incident at school. He seems to be stable, but he's here. Well, I don't know the phone call, but it was something like that. So Dad joined me in the emergency room. It was just awful. So I called your mom, I called your sister, and Jessica was very young at the time. I wasn't necessarily thinking that I was about to die, but I knew that this was not something that was going to resolve itself. I needed an intervention, like another surgery. My 20-year-old brain calculated, just understand, accept what's happening. And it's amazing that I didn't freak out, because I was the kind of personality where the expectation is that I would have lost my shit, but I don't know. I just didn't. So Dad got in touch with the doctor, and the doctor said, I don't want anybody there touching Jeremy. It's not safe. He's in the ER there. He said, you got to sign him out. And I know it seems crazy, but I need you to get him back to my office as soon as possible. Can you do it? Dad says, hold on, I think I can. Let me just clear it with him. Does he think he's okay to travel? Just hold on. So Dad comes over, tells me what the doctor had said. And I said, yeah, get me the fuck out of here. So by this point, my right pec was at least 3 times its normal size. It kept filling, and I kept bleeding it out. This was something that was happening slowly, but it was an ongoing thing, and it was just hurting so damn much. There was almost no break from the pain. We got into the car, and we made the somewhat torturous drive out to Smithtown. And when I got there, my mom was there. She was crying. Dad was so worried. And the doctor basically said, I know this looks bad, but I'm telling you, your son's life is not in danger. We have to do this procedure to stop the bleeding, but his vitals are okay. His energy is still okay. He's not going to die. Just let me see if I can get this locally, and if I can't, I will have to check him into the hospital. But please don't worry right now, please. We got this under control. We'll figure it out. If that had any effect, I don't know. I don't think my mom was buying any of that shit. So the doc tried to get to it locally. Problem is, there are certain surgical tools that are not supposed to touch parts of the human body. And if a person is awake and alert when those tools touch certain parts of the human body, the individual, in this case me, will react as if he has been hit with an electric shock. And this happened multiple times while I was on the table in his office, the same table that he did the surgery. He couldn't get to it locally. No matter how much the hydrocodones were having no effect, my body was on the highest of high alerts. So he said, I can't let you go home and check into the hospital tomorrow. We got to get you to St. John tonight, and I have to get this done. We're going to have a team of surgeons. I've already alerted the staff, but we're going to do it as soon as we clear you for surgery, okay? I said, yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Now, by this point, I was starting to feel weak, presumably from blood loss. I don't know exactly how much blood I lost. I may have lost as much as 3 pints. I don't exactly know. But I was beginning to feel weak. I still wasn't scared. I should have been petrified, but I was it's like I was so exhausted, I didn't have the energy to be afraid. So they got me to St. John in Smithtown, where, as I say, this gentleman was board certified and he was on the staff. And there were 4 other people. I assume there were 2 other surgeons, but I don't actually know that. And they noted that I was mildly hypotensive. But he said, this is not a difficult procedure. Now that we're here, we're only going to be in for 5 minutes, 10 minutes tops. And they told my parents the same thing. So you have to trust us. Your son is going to be fine. It's going to be normal recovery. We're only going to be in there. We're going to be inside, in his chest, in that area, tying down this blood vessel, this artery, whatever it was. I don't remember the wording. We're going to be in there for less than 10 minutes. We're going to patch him up. And he's going to be in recovery. And in a couple of days, he's just going to be stiff. Again, I don't know. My mom may have been screaming, fuck you, you fucking fucks. I have no idea. But I do remember being wheeled into the operating room, and 2 of the surgeons, not the doctor that had done the surgery on me, but 2 of the surgeons said, Jerry, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. You're just mildly hypotensive. You're in way better condition than you should be given the amount of blood you've lost. We are going to take care of this. And the next thing you know, you're going to be in the recovery room. And he reached his hand out. And I didn't know this guy from a hole in the wall. He reached his hand out and he took my hand. And he kind of put his on mine. And he smiled. And I don't know. I still should have been scared, but I wasn't. I believed what they were telling me. because it made sense. I had been in perfect health. This would have killed me without surgical intervention. But the rest of my body was operating like a normal, healthy 20-year-old who didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't have any preconditions, etc., etc. So I don't remember anything in the operating room. My last memory is of this communication with a doctor whose name I didn't get, and I have no idea who he was or where he is now or anything like that, because it is so many years later. But I woke up in the recovery room, and there was a little boy in there who had had some kind of an emergency dental procedure, which that's kind of a wonky thing. And the little boy, who couldn't have been more than 3, we woke up at the same time. He just told me that everything had gone well. I was going to be fine. The doctor was going to be in to see me around 7. And my dad and mom came in to the recovery room to see me. And don't really have, that part is a little sketchy. I was still under the heavy anesthetic that they had to use. And I just remember how awful I felt, but I felt awful because of the anesthetic that they had to administer. It was just, oh my God, like, you can't believe how heavy your head is. My head felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I was exhausted, but I couldn't relax. It was just a really bad combination. So the doctor came in to see me at around 7. And as I say, my parents were still there, and they were so relieved. I know that's a cliche. Of course they were relieved. But my mom, I know the way her brain works. She was fearing the worst. Dad's a little bit more circumspect. I don't know if he really thought I was going to die, but he was just as worried as you would imagine. And now they were relieved because they could see my color had returned. They were giving me a transfusion. The bleeding had stopped. Like, there was no reason for the story that they were told as far as he's going to be fine. All of the evidence supported what they were saying. They weren't like, oh, this is bullshit. So the doctor saw me, and he, just to double check that this was now several hours after the procedure they did to tie it down and stop the bleeding had not returned. And they gave me like this little pouch. It was kind of a tube that they attached to the bottom just to be on the safe side. And he just said, you only have to wear it for today. And, if you feel up to it, you can drive out to the office, or your dad can take you and I'll take it off. But you are now, aside from this little contraption to collect excess blood and fluid and whatnot, starting tomorrow, this will be a normal recovery. I did not cut any muscle, and I didn't hit any tendons or ligaments. You are going to have an excess of scar tissue on the right side. I can't do anything about that. It's not going to change the shape of the pec. If anything, it might round it off a little bit more. I actually found that to be true. The pec that was effed up always looked better than the other one. What are you going to do? It's the kind of difference you really can't tell unless you do one of those. And he also said, there's not going to be any difference in scarring. The tissue will bounce back, and you're still not going to be able to see the scar unless you know to look for it. So I did not have any excess bleeding. It didn't happen, luckily. And the next day, went back to see the doctor, and he took off the little tube and the contraption that was supposed to catch the blood and whatever extraneous fluids were collected. There was very little in there. And the relief was real, after that insane day, 3 days really, from post-surgery, starting to feel the pain until, I guess you would call it like 2 a.m. Tuesday morning when they finally tied it down. It was pretty horrifying, and not to get metaphysical, but if there's a hell, it's reliving that 70-something or 80, however many hours, reliving that in an endless loop would be pretty hellish, because every minute was either painful or scary or heart-stopping or some combination of the above. So as the doctor had said, within a few more days, they were able to, I was able to shower, thank goodness, walking around, having not showered for how many days. And I still had to wear the vest, but that was for like normal healing. And one thing that was underrated, and other gentlemen in fitness, bodybuilding, who have had this surgery will probably be nodding their head and maybe even chuckling a little bit. The recovery is more involved than I was led to believe, and I feel like I'm not the only one who had this experience. Disaster aside, I couldn't lift either arm over my head all the way for 6 months. And remember, the left side had gone perfectly. There was no issues whatsoever. In fact, the swelling was gone in less than a week. You wouldn't have, other than the vest, you wouldn't have known that anything had been done to that side either. Couldn't lift my hands completely over my head for 6 months. And I could not bench press an empty bar on either side for 1 month. So the recovery was slow, but it was incremental, and I could see the progress. It was more involved. It was slower than it was supposed to be. And I don't know if you would call this the funny part or the ironic part. Given what I just told you, an obvious question to ask is, do you regret having the surgery? I don't. I'm not happy that I went through that madness and that craziness, and I've often talked about, not just on the podcast, but in general, how lucky I am. And the events of the day of the surgery and in the succeeding days, I got really lucky, because there were so many things. If I had gone home from the doctor's office, what was I going to do? I would have had to call 911 or call a hospital. It seems crazy that I had the disaster in a place as public as New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. But I might have waited too long if I was home. I may have hesitated and kept saying, I'll be fine, I'll be fine. I got lucky there. And then I got lucky with the fact that my dad had his car. And I got lucky with the fact that this guy was on staff. And that they were able to perform this surgery at 2 a.m. on a random Monday into a Tuesday. All of these things worked in my favor. Got lucky. And it was a number of months before all of the healing, more so on the side of the disaster, took place. And I could see the enormous difference, in a good way, of what this area looked like post-surgery, post-recovery, versus pre. And it did give me more confidence. I wasn't able to translate it into anything at that time, but I did feel better about myself. And it is unfortunate that cosmetic surgery, in my case, was necessary for this. But it was. As I say, I'm not going to apologize, and I'm not going to run from it. Is how I felt then and how I feel now. For me, just me. Within 6 months, I was fully back. Now, I should point out, I was doing deadlifts and squats, and I was training arms. I was doing normal training. But when I say 6 months, it was 6 months before you would not have known anything changed as far as my training, because people would have said, hey, this guy used to do chin-ups. He's not doing them anymore. Couldn't do them. It wasn't comfortable. I needed time. The scar tissue had to soften and stretch and all of that. So it was really until the middle of 1995 that I was back at full capacity. And I should again point out, with everything that happened, I had no restriction anywhere as far as what was I capable of doing. And there are people who have had, maybe not this exact thing, but they've had issues with this surgery where the doctor was not as practiced, just in terms of, what are you cutting? If you cut muscle, you are going to be affected. You're certainly not going to be as strong and all of that. But I do feel grateful. And this experience, as harrowing and certainly traumatizing as it was, I feel like I complained a little bit less afterwards. It was a brush with mortality. It was my first real brush with mortality, where something that I chose to do, at least temporarily, blew up in my face. And probably only had another day or two if I didn't, if there was no medical intervention. It's just not supposed to go through what I went through. But I bounced back, and that's really the story of my brush with mortality at age 20 in the early and middle part of December 1994. So I want to thank you again for bearing with me on this journey back into the long ago past, almost 29 years to the day. December 9 will be 29 years. And if you enjoyed the content here and some of my previous work, don't forget to click like and subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio. And please don't forget to click the like button and smash that bell on YouTube. This has been episode 15 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. Take care.